having an amazing session so far at Ignite. My name is James McKenna. I'm a product marketing manager at NVIDIA, and I'm thrilled to be joined by Sean and Ganesh, two industry leaders from Microsoft and NVIDIA. We've lined up a really amazing fireside conversation this afternoon. We're going to dive into some of the incredible technology innovation that's happening in the manufacturing sector and how our two companies are collaborating together to accelerate the path to industrial AI and this new era of AI-enabled digital manufacturing. So with that, Sean and Ganesh, thanks so much for joining us. I wonder if you could just kick us off with a bit of an intro to your roles and why we're here having this conversation today.
Sure. Here we go. Okay. All right. Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Ganesh Shivaraman. I lead the Omniverse strategic partnership, and Microsoft is one of the partners that we manage. Very excited to be here. We're going to talk a whole lot about things of what we are doing with industrial digitalization, how Omniverse is actually helping and drive that. We're going to talk about some of the standards there and what we are actually the incredible work that we have done with Microsoft here at Ignite, and very excited to be here.
Thanks. I'm Sean Parham. I'm Group Product Manager in charge of product management for Azure IoT Operations, which we'll be demonstrating together with Omniverse. Azure IoT Operations is a brand new product from Microsoft, and its purpose is to enable customers, typically industrial or large-scale commercial customers, to connect to physical assets, say manufacturing equipment, cameras, things that are that are found on premises, to be able to collect that data, to contextualize that data, and to be able to process it locally, as well as to be able to send that data to Azure, to other data stores, or for edge processing. Azure IoT Operations gives us the ability to manage that entire data plane from the cloud, from Azure, using APIs as well as capabilities for local OT operators to be able to connect to those assets, as well as to be able to groom that data, or to put that data into shape so that it can be brought to the enterprise at large, and we'll show how that works with Omniverse.
Thank you. So we're going to cover a bunch of topics today, but I thought we'd start off by kind of a conversation on the macro trends happening in the manufacturing sector. Right. I think over the years, we've talked a lot about Industry 4.0 and where that's heading next, and the opportunities that it can bring to the industry. Lots of people talking about industrial digitalization, and then of course how generative AI kind of extends beyond the enterprise and starts becoming commonplace in industrial settings. So love to hear your perspectives on what you're hearing in the ecosystem from heavy industry customers in manufacturing. What kind of opportunities are they looking to grasp hold of at the moment?
Sure.
Why don't you start?
Yeah, I'll kick it off. So what we see is that AI is beginning to transform manufacturing and industries at large, retail, logistics, things like restaurants, quick serve restaurants. And this is really in a couple of areas with respect to these customers. One is in the cloud, of course, to be able to deal with large sets of data, to be able to reason over those large sets of data, and to be able to extract insights, do analysis, see that data in new ways, as we'll talk more about. The other is to be able to process that data in real time or near real time on the edge, to be able to react very quickly to that data, either from a control or an action perspective, or to be able to do local analysis with an AI ML model. And the reasons for these are many and multifold, but it really comes down to a couple of different things. One is to improve the overall efficiency of a process, whether that's a manufacturing process or an operational process, say for people or moving items. And then the other is to be able to give the enterprise a much broader view of what they're seeing inside their local operations, and to be able to look over that data, to reason over that data, and to extract new insights out of that, depending upon what they're finding, either differences in certain operations or differences in, let's say, quality of a process or the state of equipment. And so this is really being done to drive, as I said, efficiency, and then to gain new insights over those large data sets, again, with the help of AI.
So you talked about trends.
Yep.
Pretty much every industry that you can think are racing towards industrial digitalization. And when you think about industrial digitalization, you can think about AI and the whole race towards driving automations and efficiency. But a lot of the work that the industrial digitalization is actually going to happen first in the virtual world, and that's where Omniverse comes in. So Omniverse is essentially a developer platform that is geared towards simulation workflows, AI training, robotic workloads. A lot of like large-scale, world-scale simulations are essentially driven through the Omniverse platform. And one of the things that we are driving towards that is through standards like Universal Scene Description, which is the USD. Think about it as standards for the 3D workflows, similar to what HTML is for the web. So that's a massive adoption happening towards industrial digitalizations through the simulation workflows, and that's what Omniverse is providing. And we're excited to actually be working with all the incredible work that Microsoft and the Azure IoT operations teams are doing.
That's great. I want to maybe spend a bit of time with Sean talking about, you've been on this journey with Azure IoT operations. You're making incredible strides in this domain. You just announced the general availability, incredible milestone, so congratulations on that.
Thank you.
We'd love to maybe hear a little bit about the use cases and kind of opportunities that you're hearing from your customers in the industry.
Yeah, no, great. So expanding on the earlier concept, there's a number of things that customers are really seeking to get into. One is that improving the overall efficiency of a process. And this is all about being able to not only use the intelligence on the edge to make better decisions, to make sort of faster decisions, but critically to be able to bring expertise where it's needed, especially in areas that have been highly automated, which is where customers are pushing more and more towards. So as factories, as physical operations become more automated, there's now, if you will, a shortage of expertise that is local, or that might be local, from a ability to investigate a problem or ability to improve an overall process, or to be able to use expertise from somewhere else on a process that is advancing, either from an efficiency or an automation point of view. A good example of that would be an industrial robot that is being deployed in an area that's maybe not frequently seen to find industrial robots. And examples of that are, we've seen this in food production, for example, where industrial robots are being used to either maintain quality, or they're being used to do jobs where it's dangerous for a human being to be. But this food operation obviously is not expert in robotics. So being able to have a robotics expert peer into that operation in high definition from a modeling point of view, using real data to be able to get at that asset and to figure out what's going on is a critical use case or an opportunity for customers. The other aspect of this is, again, this ability to be able to zoom back and to see what's going on a broader scale, either remotely into a physical operation, into a factory or a facility, as well as to be able to look over these multiple facilities in order to either optimize process over larger operations, or to be able to look for ways of improving one site versus another site where, say, environmental variables or different equipment might exist. And so what Azure IoT Operations does in this world is it runs on premises with native integration into the Azure cloud. That on-premises software it runs natively inside of a Kubernetes cluster, which is able to connect to assets via a number of different protocols. We're launching with OPC